Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, and today we are going to have a talk with Gayle Jordan. Gayle is the new Executive Director of Recovering from Religion. Gayle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Callie.
So, for those not familiar, let's talk a little bit first about what exactly Recovering from Religion is and what you guys do.
Sure. Recovering from Religion was founded in 2009 by Dr. Darrell Ray. Most folks in the movement know him, but he saw a need at the time for an organization that can provide help and support to folks who are, let's call it, unpacking the baggage that is associated with not just leaving one's faith, but doubting one's faith. And what began as more of an idea has evolved now, these 6 or 7 years later, into we have three major projects, and in a nutshell, we have the Hotline Project, which is our high-profile project, and it's exactly that. It's a hotline for folks to call in from anywhere on the spectrum who are struggling with some kind of damage or fallout with doubting their faith or attempting to leave their faith. It's 184 I doubt it. So it's literally a hotline where folks can call in. It surprised me to know when I first became involved with Recovering from Religion that the Hotline Project is not a deconversion process. We are not cheerleading folks on and trying to get them to leave their faith. In fact, it's absolutely not that. It's also not counseling. It's peer support, it's encouragement, it's a compassionate listening ear, and as you might expect, the calls really are on the spectrum. Everything from, a spouse who doesn't know how one's spouse is going to react to the fact that they no longer believe what they formerly believed. It's teenagers that are still living at home and they have, what are they going to do about this? Their parents are forcing them to go to church. As you might expect, anything that you can probably imagine, that's the spectrum of the hotline callers. The big recent news with the Hotline Project is we have recently added a live chat line, which allows folks who are struggling with carving out that little bit of privacy they need to speak on the phone to be able to chat on their keyboard. And so that we have just had the soft launch for that, so there'll be more news coming from that. That's our first prong. The second prong is what we call our Secular Therapist Project. That takes professional therapists who are vetted by our professional staff. Dr. Caleb Lack is our director for that. He's a psychologist himself. The therapists of all kinds, social workers, marriage and family counselors, are vetted by Dr. Lack and his staff to ascertain that they provide only evidence-based therapy, no faith-based therapies. You won't be hearing, pray about it, get right with Jesus, go to your church, all those kinds of things that surprisingly sometimes happens unexpectedly in therapy. We have about 270 therapists registered in our database, and we've helped over 7,000 clients. That's the second prong. And the third prong is our support group projects. And these are boots on the ground, so to speak. These are our local or geographically local support groups that it's almost a continuation of the hotline. It's peer support. It's groups of folks that need a little more time and space to unpack that baggage. They meet in, town. Sometimes they're connected to meetup groups. Sometimes they're standalone. And the new addition to that is we're looking to develop virtual support groups that are religion specific, so that the particular baggage that's associated with the particular religion, there'll be a place for them to chat, a place for them to find resources and see if there's any local groups. Anyway, those are the three prongs. That's kind of in a real short list summary is what Recovering from Religion is all about.
Very cool. So if you wouldn't mind, can you give me kind of a background on your story and what brought you to being involved?
Sure. My particular flavor of religion, my former religion was Southern Baptist. I'm a Southerner. I was raised in the Southeast, and my family is still in the Southeast, and that's almost ubiquitous to be Southern Baptist. I was Southern Baptist from before I was born, is what I tell in my little talk, but and I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. I married a Southern Baptist man, and as I say, I had 4 little Southern Baptist children.
Right.
Which is sort of an impossibility, but I did. We had them in church it was typical. Every time the doors were open, we had those children in church, and they learned, they memorized Bible verses. They were involved in the youth choir and the children's choir and the ministries and everything that could possibly be. And I served in every leadership role. And Callie, when these teenagers, these bright Baptist teenagers got to be in the youth group, and they got to be at the age where they could ask questions, they came to me. They're real close in age, and the 4 of them at different times that came to me and said, "This doesn't sound right, Mom. I had taught these kids to be relentless in their pursuit of knowledge, and we valued education, and so it was legitimate they were asking these questions, and I knew that, and I thought they're teenagers. That's fine. I expected this. Let's look for the answers together." And so they went their way to ask their questions, and I went to my pastor and my Sunday school teacher, and they went to their youth pastor and their Sunday school teacher, and we got the same party line, which was very unsatisfying. There's just questions we're not going to ask, and it doesn't make sense to us, and it was just so unacceptable. So over the course of their high school years, we struggled with it. We at one point, we all decided we were going to look outside the bubble. We were going to ask more than just our Sunday school teacher and our pastor. And it was then that we started seeing that we were in a bubble. And over the course of their high school years, they, according to their own pace and their personalities, as you might expect, one by one, they came out from under the dogma of religion and into the light of reason and rationality. As I say, I was actually the tail in Charlie. I was the last holdout. And so they made their decisions. They started growing up and going away to college, and there I was, at that point now an atheist. And now what do I do? Like, I didn't know an atheist when I was going through that. And now the only ones I knew were leaving me to go to college. And so I felt compelled to start a local group. And in starting that local group, then I found my activist voice as I began to see the damage and the intrusion of religion in our politics, in our education, in our society, in our relationships. And so I found my activist voice, and that's how I started attending conventions. I went to several conventions 5 or 6 years ago and started that process. And so that is also a quick short summary of how I got to recovering from religion.
Well, so as a parent, what's going through your head at this point? Because I know you said that you and your kids were kind of having the same kind of doubts, but that, your kids kind of came out of it before you. So when, did your kids just kind of have a sit down with you once and say, like, "Look, Mom, I think I'm an atheist. Like, none of this stuff makes sense to me anymore." And
It was certainly a process, and as I kind of talk about my kids, they were very different personalities. I have 2 sons and 2 daughters, and they're 4 points of the compass as far as their personalities are concerned. Some are quiet and passive, and some are loud and aggressive, and all over the map. And so each, according to his or her own personality, came to me. One was defiant. One was concerned. And I'll be honest with you, our church experience had been a positive experience. They were not rebellious. I hate this. I don't want to go to church. They were compliant children. The oldest, he's the one, he pushed back a little hard because he's the first one who said, I don't want to attend anymore. And we said, my husband at the time, we said, well, you're going to. It was pretty authoritative. And we said, and we thought we were so progressive, Callie, because we said, oh, well, you can go to a different youth group in a different church.
Gotcha.
which was radical, because we were going to go that far. But no, And so we would have conversations where it was all 4 of them and me, and we would debate. And I held the line, as I said, longer than they did. So they were doing more working with me, trying to be patient with me because they're younger. Their brains were more pliable, maybe. They were less indoctrinated because I was 45 years old whenever I first began to have these serious doubts, and they were younger, and they had started to seek outside resources well before I did, and so this was early days of the internet, and they were more advanced than I was with that, so they knew how to find those kinds of resources, and so we worked on it together. We worked on it one-on-one. We worked on it. We really did try. In the beginning, we tried from within. We tried talking to, I remember going to my Sunday school teacher and expressing these doubts. And I remember him telling me that there were, to not read certain books. I said, I have heard, and I'll just tell you that the books were the Bart Ehrman books. I said, I have heard that they give us a better picture of where our Bible came from and maybe the historical context of all of this. And he talked me off of that. He said those are not books that are endorsed by, and I believe it was some conservative organization that didn't endorse Bart Ehrman. I'm sure all of them, but it was either American Family Association or I don't know what it was. It was someone that he used as a resource who suggested to me not to go to those books. Well, that was a big red flag. So I immediately went to the Bart Ehrman books, and they had a lot to do with my journey away. But yeah, it was tough for me, and it was tough for me in the beginning because I was losing my kids. They were gonna not so much burn in hell because Baptist doctrine overrides that. Baptist doctrine holds, and I'll tell you a funny aside about that. When I went to my parents, when I finally went to my parents and told them of my deconversion, my poor weeping Southern Baptist mother, that was the only thing that gave her comfort, is that she knew that neither I nor the children were going to burn in hell because Baptist doctrine holds that once you receive your salvation, you can't discard it, you can't reject it.
Right? Yeah, I have a friend who grew up that, and that's the reason that his mom is only slightly disappointed that he's an atheist, because she doesn't have to worry about his eternal soul.
Which I guess I guess in a dark, twisty way, I'm grateful for that, because it gives her, some comfort when otherwise, because she's devastated. She's devastated that the children aren't religious. She's devastated that I'm not religious. And so, yeah, that's one of those recovering from religion type, issues that we have to deal with is our believing family and how they respond to what we have, to the conclusions to which we have all come. So, yeah, so in the beginning it was much tougher. I really did think I was losing my kids. I just, and because church had been such a positive experience for me, I didn't want, regardless of the theology of it, I didn't want him to lose the experience of church. I thought it was a positive thing. So, yeah, it was a tough process, but at some point, and I don't know specifically when that point was, I sort of, crossed the Rubicon. I got there, and then it was all a positive thing. And then I was so proud of them for having made the decision that they made.
Yeah, and the reason that I ask is because I was just thinking, most of the time when you have, someone who is devoutly religious and, it's someone who's a loved one and you say, I'm an atheist, a lot of times, if that person is a parent or a grandparent or something along those lines, there's that sort of feeling of like, well, I failed you because I didn't give you a strong enough foundation or something like that. Sure. But your experience is a little unique in that you were kind of having a lot of those doubts at the same time. So I was just, kind of curious about how that, were some of those feelings the same? Were they different? Was it a different dynamic because you were already having those doubts yourself but you just hadn't made it fully to the other side?
And while we were going through it, it was monumental to us as it should have been. It's probably a relatively routine process. Most folks, when we all share these, recovering from religion stories, these coming out, they follow a pattern. First you doubt, and then you start to research, and then you doubt a little more, and then you come off of if you start way to we're going to call it way to the right, and you start to make progress, and you drop pieces of the theology, you drop a belief in the Trinity, or you drop that it was all literal. That's one of the first things you drop, is that the Bible's literal, and you just make this piece by piece by piece. It was years before we identified as atheists. All of us, struggled through it, and we went through the process. We went through, well, now we're just going to be progressive Christians. Well, now we're just going to say, church is social, but it's where we get our morality. So even if it's not literally true, even if Jesus was not a literal person, it still is it's an institution, and it's, and then you start to, and then it falls apart even farther, and you say, maybe it isn't such a positive thing. So it was probably routine. To us, it felt like we were the only ones who had ever experienced anything like this, because as I said, and as we know that statistics prove out, we knew atheists, we just didn't know that we knew atheists. And so we were the only ones, just the family. And so we went at different paces. The kids were, I'm not kidding when I say they were much more pliable than and I held on longer for whatever reason. And so they all got there, and then finally, it was just, there was just nothing left to hold on to. You dropped everything. And as I said, it wasn't until after they left then that I began to get my activist voice, where I felt like, oh, not only is this not true, but it's destructive. And not only have I been believing the wrong things, I've been endorsing it, I've been teaching it, I've been financially supporting it, and so then you just feel compelled, or I felt compelled. I had some work to do. I had some repair to do. I had some giving back to my community to do. So that's what I'm doing.
The Brainstorm Podcast presents The Shift to Reason, Saskatchewan's first secular conference. It's happening on April 30th, 2016, and features some great speakers that include Seth Andrews, Nate Phelps, and Laveda Leaning, along with others. This one-day event in Regina includes lunch and a VIP after-party with the speakers. Tickets are available at shifttoreason.eventbrite.ca and start at $95 for early bird tickets, with student pricing and limited VIP tickets. Keep up to date with the conference on our Facebook page, facebook.com/shifttoreason.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Jen, Maria, and Jess. Thank you so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to cool stuff like a big shout out of the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. Now, and stop me if this is a boundary that you don't want to cross, but but I'm curious. Sure. Obviously being, Southern Baptist, as most religions are super, super patriarchal. So I'm wondering where your husband was in all of this. Did you have these conversations with him about, your doubts and that kind of stuff, and what? What
an insightful question, Callie. And no, it's not off limits, and I appreciate your sensitivity to it. No, he. In the beginning, when we started having the doubts, we were a very conventional family. I was a stay-at-home mom. He was the breadwinner. I did the kids in the house, and he did the job and all. But it was a happy family. It was a pretty functional, happy family. So when the children began to have doubts, we did come together as a family. And he was unwilling to entertain even the questions. That was just, he said there's just questions we're not going to ask. And so that was a red flag, and that was unsatisfying, and that was unacceptable to me to tell the children. He felt like he could. He was more authoritative, and he felt comfortable telling the children, you just don't ask those questions. And I just couldn't get behind that. And so that, it was imperceptible at the time, but that was the crack. And I don't always tell the story, but I'm happy to share it. As time went on, he became less and less receptive of even the children asking him questions, and there was tension between he and I because I was entertaining the ideas that the children were having, plus I was having my own doubts. In fact, he was one of the first people I went to because of the conventional nature of our marriage. He was the authority, whatever. And so I followed the procedure and went to him. And when he didn't feel comfortable with discussing that was kind of that was a negative thing that happened to us. But I remember finally, toward the end, we were in a restaurant and we were discussing this elephant in the room. And I just said, if it's not true, don't you want to know? Don't you want to know if it's not true? And Callie, he said to me, no. And that was to me, that was my moment. That was my moment where I said, that's the beginning of the end of it. And so the marriage didn't survive. There were some other issues too. And yet, that was a pivotal moment for me when I knew it was so important to me to know whether this was true. And then when I found out and discovered it wasn't true, to act on that. And it wasn't a priority for him. It just wasn't a priority. So he participated in the beginning, and then he couldn't do anymore. And so the children have a relationship with him, but they don't talk about it. They don't talk about their difference in belief. He's a religious person. He still attends church. He's still quite a believer. The children know that he is, and he knows that the children are not believers, but it's just a subject that they don't talk about. So, and I'm glad they still have a relationship with him. We're distant. He and I can communicate, but we're not close. And he's moved on with his life, and I've moved on with mine.
Well, and I think that's important too. I mean, sometimes we just have to accept. I mean, we're not going to talk everyone into being an atheist. And, if that relationship is valuable to you, maybe that's a subject you just don't broach, and the rest of the relationship.
That's one way to manage that. That's one way to manage that. In fact, in recovering from religion, that's one of the options. Some people can do that. Some people can, and really that's sort of where I've settled in with my parents. They're not happy about my atheism. They're certainly not happy about my atheist activism. And yet they still love me, and we're Southern enough that we can communicate as if it's not a problem. We have that ability to do that. We just skim over the top of it. So, and some, for some families, maybe that's the best you can hope for. I mean, it still allows you to retain some part of the relationship. It still minimizes the drama and the tension, when you're together, and that's okay too.
And so, you said after this, that's. Finally you started finding your actual activist voice. So talk to me about what that looked like and how you started actually getting involved in activism.
It's so funny. When the children started to leave and they went away to college one by one, they were one grade after another in high school. So they just one year after another, they went to do their big fat lives without me. Who knew? And so I looked in my, I started looking in my local area. I truly didn't know another non-believer. And so I looked on the internet. I found the meetup group in Nashville, the Nashville Atheist Group. And so I live about, 45 minutes from Nashville. So once a month, I drive up to Nashville and socialize with the group. And I just was so energized talking to other folks who had that same experience, because I had been so in a bubble. And this release of this belief, it affected everything, every decision about everything. I was, when I was a believer, my religion, as it so often does, informed my politics. So not only was I a believer, but I was a, conservative Republican voter, because of course, God opposes gay marriage, and of course God opposes abortion, and of course, and then when you take away the religious reasons for all of that, the rational position, is not that. Right. And so it affected everything. It affected how I opened my eyes in the morning. It affected how I decided to live my life this one day. I have a little minor story that parallels that. As I was finding my way through all this, when my children were in their high school years, coincidentally, I was having a parallel journey to recover my health. I had been, a church lady with the denim jumper and casserole dishes and the whole thing, without a priority for taking care of myself, because, this life was, while it mattered, it wasn't, I had Disneyland I had to go to, when it was all over, I was getting to go to Disneyland. That was the important thing. And so when I discarded the belief, when I discarded the faith, that was a whole new universe to me. Oh my God, this is my turn. This is my chance. This is my one shot. And so I started having a recovery of my health. I lost weight and I got fit and I got interested in taking care of my health because it mattered. And so that everything seemed to change then anyway. So I needed the outside stimulation. So I had been going up to Nashville to participate in that group. And then I just decided, my little small town south of Nashville, I live in Murfreesboro, didn't have a meetup group, and so I started one. I paid the fees for the meetup thing. I put it on the site. We had 2 or 3 folks, and for a while, that was what we did. 2 or 3 folks. We would meet at Starbucks, or we would go out to a pub once a month, or whatever, just to talk, just to discuss things that you had never discussed before, discussing morality and discussing, how the universe came to be, and discussing what else is out there, and discussing everything, politics, everything that before was either restricted or so influenced by religion. And so that group kind of toddled along for a while, and then we hit a critical mass where we started having a real healthy group, and now it's a huge group. We have about 700 members. Now we don't have near that. We all have 60 or so people at any one meetup, but for a small town, that's a pretty healthy group.
Yeah, that's huge.
So, yeah. So that's kind of where I started that on, on a local level. And then I was also simultaneously, I attended my first American Atheist Conference in Des Moines in 2010 or 11. And then I went to TAM, a skeptics meeting, in Vegas, the big skeptics meeting. And so, and then the rest, as I say, is history. And so then I've been involved in the movement since then.
Isn't it interesting? I think a lot of people don't understand exactly how important those meetup groups can be, because I've heard people say, why would you just get up, just meet with a bunch of other people just to talk about how you don't believe in God? And it's so funny to me, like, the people who do that obviously aren't the people who came from oppressive religious environments. And I didn't come from one myself, so I mean, this isn't me speaking from a similar experience, but it's just, if I like flying my little quadcopter, and if I get together with a bunch of other people who like flying quadcopters, that's not activism, right? That's just right. That's just socializing. But when it comes to being atheists or non-believers, I mean, that is activism. The building community and that kind of stuff. That's some of the most important kind of activism, because so many of us are in pockets where we can't find other people who. And
I think you hit on it. It is incredibly important. It is local activism, and as our group grows, everybody's on their own journey, and they're from anywhere on the spectrum. And when they come, sometimes they're moved, because all of a sudden, and I don't know this feeling because it wasn't like this for me, they walk into a group, a healthy, happy community of 30 or more people, and they just sort of like, they didn't know there was anybody else that felt this way. So it's a joy and a privilege and a pleasure to get to participate in that, and to get folks, when they walk in and they see that, and you can almost see the relief on their faces, and they're relaxed because they can finally talk about this thing that's so huge. And as I said, it affected everything about how I did everything. It affected my health. It affected my finances. It affected my outlook on life. It affected everything for me. So it was critically important to me to be able to talk this through with other people.
Yeah, I have to imagine the feelings probably a lot like the first time I went to my first trans support group. And
I cannot imagine what that must have been like. I can't imagine
walking into a room full of strangers and everyone's smiling and people are like cracking jokes, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, like these people are functioning human beings. I can be too.
Oh, it's so moving when you say that, and you think about the sad state of affairs for trans folks now, and the young people, and how, I listened to your podcast with Cass Midgley and Bob Pondilla, the Everyone's Agnostic, and the statistics you were giving for the suicide attempts. It's obscene. And I'm trying to see through your eyes what that must be like to see these support groups and to see a young person respond to that when they do think they're the only ones who've ever felt this way, and no one will ever understand this, and then to walk into, I just can't imagine that feeling.
Well, and speaking of, in your work with recovering from religion, do you find a lot of intersectionality with people, struggling with their gender identity or their sexual orientation along with the religious struggle?
Clearly, because it is so tied to religion. Because I'm not saying that there are secular families out there that wouldn't struggle with that. If a child comes and says, "This is what I think I am. This is how I feel," I'm not saying that secular families might not struggle with that, but you can be damn sure that religious families are. Right. And so often our calls, and the recovering from religion is so careful with protecting the identity of folks. I often wish that we could share either recordings or transcripts from some of the calls, because they're profoundly moving, and sometimes they're in a whisper, and it's a young person in a closet, literally in a closet, trying to talk for a few minutes about, what do I do, where do I go? If we sense that, if we get the impression, and we go through training to be a hotline agent, and it's extensive training. If we pick up on signals that anyone is in crisis, we immediately send them to the crisis network that can help them with that. If we have a gay teenager, or if we have a spouse who feels like that, he or she is not safe because of, the doubts that they're having about religion, we immediately send them to the appropriate hotline place. But often they're not in crisis. They just need someone to talk to hear it's okay. You're not alone. There are other people who understand what you're going through, and let's see what we can do about sending some resources your way. When we do the hotline calls, we've got a whole computer screen of resources that we can send folks. We'll look for meetup groups in their area, whatever we can do to provide support for them. So yes, that comes into play quite often in those hotline calls, as you might expect it would.
Oh yeah. In another question that I had, and this is something that has been actually asked to me personally, and I had to say that I didn't know, because I have, people who listen to the show come to me and ask if I know any therapists in a certain area or something along those lines. And I always point people back towards the Secular Therapist Project, because, that's something that I can trust,
Sure.
But do you know, off the top of your head, if any of the folks who are in that, do specialize in, dealing with LGBT issues, specifically helping people struggling with their gender identity?
I know that they do, and I know that when you as a client go to the Secular Therapist page, when you put in your information, once again, even the therapist identity is protected, because they are also, they may be in a community where if word got out that they're completely secular, they may be ostracized. So even their identity is protected, not only the client's identity, but the therapist's identity. So when a client goes to the website and puts in his or her information about where they live and how many miles, are they willing to travel to find this therapy, there's a short question about, what is it you're looking for? Do you need a psychologist? Do you need a marriage or family counselor? Do you need a social worker? Do you need someone who specializes in a field? So yes, we do have therapists that specialize in that kind of therapy. And not only do we then match that client's need to the database, but some of the therapists nowadays, with this newfangled interwebs, they can provide, they can provide remote counseling. So that's even become an option as well. And so I'm not sure what the insurance arrangements are with that. Some folks, I don't know if folks' insurance covers that therapist. I'm sure that's it's an up and coming thing, so it probably does. And I don't know a lot about it, but we do have therapists that provide remote counseling.
Something I could do with a very sexy lady friend of mine that people would find provocative, interesting, and entertaining enough to tune in week after week. Oh, I know! A podcast! If you'd like to hear me and Kate be provocative and thought-provoking week after week, join us on the Unbuckling the Bible Belt podcast. We'd love for you to be part of our audiological three-way.
Hey y'all, this is Tucker from the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. And I might live in a beer can, but I ain't no inbred redneck. And if you listen to my podcast, I'm gonna learn you something. And no, I ain't talking about how to marry your cousin and not have kids with 16 fingers and stuff like that. I mean, I actually talk about real stuff and teach people where the Bible stole its stories from. So y'all give me a listen, would you? Thank you.
Very, very cool. So if one wanted to get involved, become a hotline agent, become a chat agent, where can we go? Where can we find out? What's the process look like to get involved with that?
Thanks for asking that question, Callie. That's great. So the website is recoveringfromreligion.org. That's real simple. When you get there, there'll be a variety of buttons. There's donate buttons, which we always we rely on those kinds of contributions. But for the hotline and the chat line agents, there's a volunteer button, and that, as you can expect, we have hundreds of volunteers. The hotline's open 24 hours on the weekends, and it's open 6 to midnight on the weekdays. We'd love to, when we get enough volunteers, we'll get that to being 24 hours. And then the chat line is also, we're also trying to have that go for 24 hours. So we need scads and scads of volunteers. So the volunteer process, it's a simple form. You fill out a simple form, and then you're contacted by our volunteer coordinator at Recovering from Religion. And then we begin the process of plugging you in. If you have the time to be able to be a hotline agent, we go through the training for that. There's the active listening training and that kind of thing. Then there's the technical training, because of course that's involved with, running a hotline, as you have the platform for how that's hosted. But that's the only thing you have to do is go to the website, hit the volunteer button, and then after that, it's taken care of for you. We'll walk you through the entire process of plugging in and being a hotline agent or whatever volunteer, whatever skills you have to offer. We'll find a place to plug you into Recovering from Religion.
Yeah, and something that I think is important to point out about that, because, I have a lot of people ask all the time how they can get involved in, secular activism and LGBT activism, or, in any sort of activism. And I think this is a fantastic way to do this. And if the idea of talking to people and talking to strangers seems intimidating, obviously, I want to honor that feeling, but I kind of want to relate a little bit from my own personal experience. I'm not a hotline agent, unfortunately. I wouldn't sleep if I did that too. But I used to work with a nonprofit called A Voice for the Innocent, which their president and founder, one of my best friends, has been on the show several times. But basically, the nonprofit they provide a support community for those affected by rape and sex abuse, and that is not something I have a history with. And so my immediate thing was, how do I talk to somebody about their experience without screwing it up? Sure. I don't want them to leave the conversation feeling worse than when they came in. I don't want to betray the trust that someone shows in me by sharing their story with me. And we sat down with a therapist who actually deals with this kind of thing. This is the only kind of therapy that she does, is helping people recover from sexual abuse and sexual assault. And the thing to understand, when people come to you and they tell you their stories, 99% of the time they're not expecting you to have a magic solution to all their problems.
Right.
What they want is they want somebody to listen, and they want somebody to believe them. They want somebody that when I say, this happens to me and this is a struggle that I'm having, they don't want to hear you're wrong. They want to hear, wow, that's got to be really hard. Talk to me more about that. Tell me what you're going through.
Right.
That kind of stuff. Like you want to listen, you want to believe, and you want to validate. And it's really that simple. People just want to.
And haven't we all had that experience that just talking through with a trusted friend, sometimes just articulating it, you get your thoughts together because you haven't voiced it, you haven't even said the words, and sometimes just saying the words allows you to take a step back and you can express yourself, and sometimes things come out that you don't even know that you're thinking, but in talking it through. So, and we know that's the value of a lot of therapy, is just working through it and talking through it. And in addition to that, our hotline agents, I was terrified about it because I thought the exact same way you did. I thought, what if I say the wrong thing? The hotline is so we're so careful not to deconvert. That's my natural inclination. I'm sure. Let me tell you. Yeah, go look up this Bible verse. Because I'm an aggressive. I'm an atheist. I'm an activist. I want everybody to come into the light of reason. I want everybody to not have this burden hanging over them that they're going to burn in hell, or the people they love are going to burn in hell, or that they're broken and that they need a cure. I want to bring everybody there. That's my natural inclination. And I have learned my lesson. The hotline is not for that. And so I was terrified going into it because I was, I'm going to say the wrong thing, or I'm going to mess up, or I'm, going to violate our own policy. And so I will assure everybody, number one, the training is extensive. We do go through all of the techniques of listening. We go through mock phone calls. We have all kinds of practice. Then before you ever take a phone call, you have a mentor and you listen into telephone calls. And so you listen to how the mentor responds, and you hear several different phone calls. You can participate in as many phone calls. You can have a mentor. You can listen in to a mentored call where the mentor's doing the talking to the caller for as long as you'd like until you get comfortable. And then in addition to that, when you have your first call, you have a mentor on the line. And you can, you've always got your mentor to fall back on. And then finally, you're still, when you begin to take calls yourself, you still have access to a mentor. They're online at all times that the hotline is open so that you can reach out and say, I'm in a panic. I've got somebody on the line. The mentor can step in. There's never been there's no one that calls in is going to freak out if, you can say, I'm going to ask the mentor to join us because I'm kind of in an uncomfortable situation. I want to be able to help you, but I'm not sure what to say. There's never been any kind of problem with that. So I can give you an assurance that whoever volunteers won't ever be forced into a situation that they're not comfortable with until they have a level of comfort with it. But that was very insightful for you to realize that's an apprehension that folks have, that I don't want to mess up. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to make it worse when they've called for help. Yeah.
So, the bottom line is if you're a person who is looking to get involved, I think this is a fantastic way to do it because, it involves, exactly as much time as you feel like you have to put into it. And all you have to really do is just be there for somebody, just be there to listen and have a conversation. And, it's not always easy to do that kind of thing. I mean, I've had very tough conversations with people, but I think it's a very important way to get involved in supporting people. So I would encourage anyone who is, who's looking for a way to get involved in the movement. I think that's like, I would even say, get involved with your local meetup group, 1, and then 2, I would say this is probably like directly after that, like a really, really great way. What a wonderful endorsement, Callie. I so appreciate you saying that. And it means more coming from you even than me. It's my org, and so of course I'm going to say that. And I so appreciate you in giving us that endorsement and that shout out about it, because it may not be on the stage activism. It may not be Silverman, doing his lecture. It may not be at that level, but
it is activism in its very purest sense. You have people at their most vulnerable. You have them at their in a crisis. You have them. These folks' lives are in upheaval because this whole foundation that I believe, I no longer believe, what am I going to do with this? And so there is no better way that you could jump in and be in service if you want to give back to the community. And I so appreciate you saying that. And I encourage anybody who is interested in it to follow the process, go through the training, go through the volunteering, and plug into the Hotline Project. You won't regret that.
Well, Gayle, I really, really appreciate you taking the time here. We've already kind of gone over the website stuff and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is important for people to know about recovering from religion, about ways to get a hold of you, ways to volunteer, that kind of stuff?
I think we've covered everything. You've been so thorough and so good to think of all those things. We are minor sponsors of the Reason Rally, so we will be around if anybody wants to, hang out at our table on the mall at Reason Rally on June 4th. I know you probably promoted that, Callie, but so I want to get plug in for that. And as always, that nonprofits, they really do function from the kindness of others, and so we don't have membership and we don't have conventions. All of our manpower is turned around to help in the community. So we're dependent upon the contributions of folks who are able to do that, whatever amount you're able to do. That's another way to have atheist activism. And so we appreciate any kind of donations and that kind of thing. And spread the word for us. If you could, one of the things that I ask folks is to give us a shout out on either in your social media or in your meetup groups. If you possibly can, direct them to us, because we can't help folks if they don't know about us. And so that's the last thing I'd ask for, is for promotion on the personal, individual level from everybody, to let folks know that we're here and we're ready to listen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being so generous with your own personal story and for letting us know all the cool stuff that Recovering from Religion's doing.
Oh, Callie, thank you so much. I so appreciate that.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to say thanks once again to our guest, Gayle Jordan, for being so generous with her time and her story. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. If you want to support the show and the activism that we do, you can make a per-episode donation at patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. And if you can't support financially, you can still help us out really big and go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.